Working as a night shift operator at an emergency dispatch center is not for the faint of heart. You hear it all, from prank calls to desperate cries for help. But one call in particular still haunts me. It was a call that came from within our own building, and the voice on the other end was all too familiar. It was a quiet Wednesday night, and I was halfway through my shift. The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, and the hum of computers filled the otherwise silent room. Most of my colleagues were out on breaks, leaving me alone with the muted chaos of the screens. Suddenly, the phone rang. I picked it up, reciting my usual greeting. 911, what's your emergency? But instead of a panicked voice, I was met with silence. I repeated my question, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to type. Finally, a voice came through, low and breathy. "They're watching me," the voice whispered. I straightened in my chair, a chill running down my spine. The tone was hushed, filled with fear. "Who's watching you? Can you tell me where you are?" I asked, my voice steady. The line crackled, and I could hear the faint sound of static. The voice replied, "They're here, in the building." My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't uncommon for prank calls to come through, but something about this one felt different, too real. I glanced at the caller ID, expecting to see a familiar number or location. What I saw made my blood run cold. The call was coming from our building, from the very room I was sitting in. I quickly looked around, expecting to see one of my co-workers playing a joke, but the room was empty. My pulse quickened as I realized the voice was familiar. It sounded like Jenna, one of my colleagues who had gone on a break just 10 minutes earlier. "Jenna, is that you?" I asked, hoping to hear her laugh and reveal it was all just a prank. But there was no laughter, only a strained silence. Then she whispered, "They're coming." Fear clenched my stomach. I knew Jenna was the only other operator on duty, and if she wasn't in the break room, where was she? I tried to keep my voice calm, professional. "Jenna, where are you exactly? Are you safe?" A soft sob came through the line, followed by a chilling response. "They've locked me in. I can't get out. Please, help me." The line went dead, and the silence that followed was deafening. I jumped up from my seat, my mind racing. The break room was just down the hall, but as I approached, a sinking feeling settled in my gut. The door was ajar, and inside, the room was dark. I pushed the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no sign of Jenna. Panic began to set in. I raced back to my desk and called security, explaining the situation. They assured me they'd checked the building, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened. I checked the logs for Jenna's entry card, only to find that it hadn't been used in over an hour. If she was still in the building, she hadn't left the break room. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for security to arrive. When they finally did, they swept the building from top to bottom, but there was no trace of Jenna. Her phone was found on the desk, and the cameras showed her entering the break room but never leaving. To this day, Jenna's disappearance remains a mystery. The incident was investigated, but no clues ever surfaced. I still work the night shift, but every time the phone rings, I brace myself, half expecting to hear her voice again. Sometimes, late at night, when the building is silent, I think I hear faint whispers, like someone calling for help. But when I listen closer, there's nothing there, just the echoes of a mystery that will never be solved. Working the night shift at a 24-hour convenience store wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills. Plus, it gave me a chance to catch up on reading and binge-watching shows on my phone. Little did I know, one night would turn out to be more spine-chilling than any horror story I could find online. It was a typical Thursday night, quiet and uneventful. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as I arranged snacks on the shelves. Around midnight, a chill crept through the air, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I shrugged it off as the AC kicking in, but there was something off. You know that gut feeling you get when you know someone's watching you? Yeah, that. I glanced at the door, and that's when I saw him. A man standing just outside the glass, staring in. He was tall, with a scruffy beard and wild eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. He didn't move, just stood there, staring. I tried to ignore it, thinking he'd just come in if he wanted something. But he didn't. He just kept staring. Minutes felt like hours as I went about my tasks, pretending not to notice him. But how could I not? It felt like he was burning a hole through the glass. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he walked in. The doorbell chimed and a cold gust followed him. He didn't head for the aisles, just walked straight to the counter, leaning in close. Too close. "Are you alone?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. The question sent a shiver down my spine. Why would he ask that? My mind raced, trying to think of a lie, but my mouth betrayed me. "Yeah, just me," I stammered, immediately regretting it. His lips curled into a creepy smile, and he nodded slowly, like he'd just confirmed something. He didn't say anything else, just wandered off to the back of the store. I tried to act natural, but I couldn't help glancing over my shoulder. He disappeared behind the shelves, and for a moment, I lost sight of him. My heart pounded in my chest as I imagined him lurking behind a corner, ready to jump out. Suddenly, the lights flickered, once, twice. Then they went out, plunging the store into darkness. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the counter. The emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie shadows around the store. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps as I scanned the room. There he was, standing at the end of an aisle, holding a knife. The dim light reflected off the blade, making it gleam ominously. My heart raced and I felt a cold sweat break out. He started walking towards me, slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. I backed up, my hands shaking. There was no way out except past him. My mind raced, trying to think of something, anything to do. As he got closer, I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy metal display stand. I didn't even think, just swung it with all my might. It hit him, and he stumbled back, surprised. Without waiting to see what happened, I ran for the back door, bursting out into the alley. I kept running, not looking back, until I reached the safety of a neighboring store. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. The lights had come back on, and the store looked normal again, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. That night, I learned that the scariest monsters aren't in horror movies. They're real, and they walk among us. And sometimes they just want to know if you're alone. Driving a taxi on the night shift in a small town might sound boring, but believe me, it's anything but. You meet all sorts of people, some just heading home from a long day, others looking for a late-night adventure. But one night, I picked up a fare I'll never forget, and it's the reason I always keep my doors locked between rides. It was around 2 a.m., the dead of night, when I got a call for a pickup on the outskirts of town. The address was an old, run-down house that looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in decades. As I pulled up, I noticed the place was dark, no signs of life. I double-checked the address. It was right. I waited for a minute, thinking maybe someone had made a mistake. Just as I was about to leave, the back door of my cab opened, and a woman slid in. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with long, tangled hair and a pale complexion that seemed to glow in the dim interior light. Her clothes looked a bit outdated, like she'd stepped out of a different era. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep things professional. She didn't respond right away, just stared ahead, her eyes distant. After a moment, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Take me to the bridge," she said. There was a certain sadness in her tone that made me uneasy. The bridge she mentioned was on the edge of town, a place known for being a local lover's spot, but also the site of a tragic accident years ago. A couple had driven off the side during a storm, their car plunging into the river below. The story had turned into a local legend, with tales of ghost sightings and mysterious happenings. As I drove, I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, lost in thought. I tried making small talk, but she didn't respond. There was something off about her, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We reached the bridge and I pulled over. "Here we are," I said, trying to sound cheerful, but the atmosphere was thick with an unsettling vibe. She didn't move, just sat there staring out at the river. "You know, they say this place is haunted," I said, trying to lighten the mood. She finally looked at me through the mirror, her eyes hollow and tired. "They're right," she said softly, then reached for the door handle. I watched as she stepped out, walking towards the edge of the bridge. I waited, expecting her to come back or at least wave me off, but she just stood there, looking down at the water. Something told me to check on her. I left the car and approached cautiously. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, but she didn't respond. As I got closer, I realized she was crying. Before I could say anything else, she turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "You can't save me," she whispered. Then, to my horror, she stepped over the edge. I rushed to the railing, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no splash, no sound. I looked down, but the river was calm, undisturbed. Panicked, I ran back to my car, ready to call the police. But when I got in, the back seat was empty and the door was closed. I sat there trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Did I imagine it? No, I knew what I saw. I drove back to the spot, but there was no sign of her, nothing at all. To this day, I can't explain it. I checked my dash cam later, but the footage was blank during the time she was in the car. Was she a ghost? A figment of my imagination? All I know is I never take fares to the bridge at night anymore. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.